October 20th, 1944. 6:42 a.m., Leyte Gulf, Philippines. General Douglas MacArthur stood on the deck of the USS Nashville reviewing invasion maps for the Philippine landing. He looked at the coastline chart and said, "These depth measurements are incorrect. We'll run aground before we reach the beach." His chief of staff checked the source. The maps had been drafted by a Navy ensign, a female ensign. MacArthur's response was immediate. "Get me real reconnaissance. I'm not risking 200,000 men on guesswork from a woman playing cartographer." But while MacArthur was dismissing her work, that woman was already in the water. Lieutenant Dorothy Marsh, 27 years old, hydrographic surveyor, had spent the previous 14 nights swimming enemy-controlled beaches in the dark, measuring depths MacArthur's reconnaissance teams had missed. She had mapped 47 kilometers of coastline under Japanese fire, and she had 11 hours before MacArthur's invasion fleet would discover that her incorrect maps were the only reason they wouldn't be slaughtered on the beach. This is the story of the woman MacArthur called unqualified, who saved his invasion by doing the job his own men refused to do. Dorothy Marsh was 27. Before the war, she was a geography instructor at Smith College in Massachusetts. She enlisted in the Navy in 1942 after her brother was killed at Guadalcanal. The Navy assigned her to cartography because they didn't allow women in combat roles. By 1943, she was drafting navigation charts for Pacific operations. She had requested transfer to reconnaissance survey teams 6 times. 6 denials. The reason was always the same. Hydrographic survey required physical endurance unsuitable for female personnel. By October 1944, MacArthur's planned return to the Philippines faced a critical problem. The invasion required precise depth measurements of Leyte Gulf's approach channels. Japanese forces controlled the coastline. American reconnaissance aircraft could photograph the beaches, but they couldn't measure underwater depth. Navy frogmen teams had attempted night surveys, but Japanese coastal defenders killed 3 swimmers in 2 weeks. The surveys stopped. MacArthur's staff worked with incomplete data, depth charts from 1920s civilian maritime surveys. The charts were 24 years old. Coastlines change. Storms shift sandbars. The approach channels MacArthur planned to use might not exist anymore. Dorothy had reviewed the existing charts in August 1944. She recognized the problem immediately. The 1920 surveys measured depth at high tide. MacArthur's invasion was scheduled for dawn low tide. The depth differential in Leyte Gulf was 1.8 meters. Landing craft drew 1.2 meters fully loaded. The math was simple. At low tide, using 1920 measurements, half of MacArthur's landing craft would run aground 200 meters from the beach. Men would have to wade through chest-deep water under Japanese machine gun fire. Casualties would be catastrophic. She filed a report to the Naval Hydrographic Office explaining the discrepancy. The office chief returned it with a note. Theoretical analysis. Field verification required before operational use. Lieutenant Marsh lacks survey qualifications. The Navy needed field verification. They weren't getting it. The frogmen teams had been shut down after 3 deaths in 2 weeks. Nobody wanted to send more swimmers into Japanese-controlled waters. The invasion was scheduled for October 20th. It was already September. Time was running out. Ensign Thomas Chen, 23, from California, September 8, 1944. He was part of a Navy frogman team attempting to survey the eastern approach to Leyte Gulf. Japanese defenders spotted his team 40 meters from shore. Machine gun fire killed Chen and 2 other swimmers. Their bodies were recovered by submarine 3 days later. Chen had completed 30 meters of depth measurement before he was killed. The data was useless. Too incomplete for navigation planning. He died for nothing because the survey method was wrong. Sending teams of swimmers created noise, movement, targets. The Japanese heard them, saw them, killed them. Lieutenant Rachel Morrison, 29, Navy nurse, September 24, 1944. She was aboard a reconnaissance destroyer that ran aground on an uncharted sandbar 800 meters off Leyte's coast. The ship was immobilized for 7 hours under Japanese artillery fire. Morrison was treating wounded sailors in the medical bay when a shell penetrated the hull. 14 casualties, including Morrison. The sandbar that grounded the destroyer wasn't on any American chart. It was exactly the kind of hazard Dorothy had warned about. The warning was dismissed as alarmist speculation from a non-field surveyor. Morrison died because the charts were wrong and nobody was fixing them. October 6, 1944, 10:23 p.m. Dorothy made a decision that violated 3 separate Navy regulations. She would conduct the depth survey herself, not through official channels, not with authorization. She would do it the way she knew would work: solo swimmer, night approach, systematic grid measurement. The method Navy Command had rejected as too dangerous for individual operators. She understood why the Frogmen teams had failed. They worked in groups. Groups made noise. They used motorized insertion boats that Japanese coastal listening posts could hear from a kilometer away. They worked too close to shore, trying to measure depths in the landing zone itself. The method was wrong. Dorothy knew a better way. She would work alone. Solo swimmer, no insertion boat. She would swim from 2 kilometers offshore, beyond Japanese patrol range. She would measure depths in a systematic grid pattern, working parallel to the beach, never approaching closer than 100 meters. She would work at night during the darkest phase of the lunar cycle. No moon, no light, just darkness and mathematics. She requisitioned a wetsuit, depth line, and waterproof notepad from the supply depot. She told the supply officer it was for training exercises. The officer didn't question it. Equipment requisitions from cartography staff weren't unusual. She took a motor launch from the survey ship to within 2 kilometers of Leyte's coast. The water was 26 degrees Celsius. The night was moonless. She could hear Japanese radio chatter from defensive positions on the beach. Voices carrying across water, laughter, someone smoking. The enemy was 100 meters away and had no idea she was there. She knew the consequences if she was discovered. Unauthorized approach to enemy territory, operating survey equipment without orders. If she was captured, the Japanese would execute her as a spy. If she survived and was discovered by Navy Command, it was a court-martial. But she also knew the math. If MacArthur's invasion used the existing charts, 2,000 to 3,000 men would die in the water before they reached the beach. She slipped into the water at 11:47 p.m. The water was cold. Not freezing, but cold enough that her muscles would cramp after 3 hours. She wore a black wetsuit she had modified herself. Standard Navy issue was gray. Gray showed up against dark water. She had dyed hers black using engine grease and ink. She looked like a shadow. Invisible. The depth measurement process was mechanical. Drop weighted line. Count seconds as weight descends. Feel the line go slack when weight hits bottom. Measure line length. Record depth. Swim 20 meters. Repeat. She had practiced the technique in San Diego Bay until she could do it blind. She could measure depth to within 0.1 meters accuracy without using a light. She worked in complete darkness. The only sound was water moving, her breathing, the occasional splash when she dropped the weighted line. October 7th through 18th. Dorothy conducted 14 separate night surveys. Each survey lasted 4 to 6 hours. She swam systematic grid patterns parallel to the beach, measuring depth every 20 meters. The work was exhausting. After 3 hours, her hands cramped from the cold. After 4 hours, her shoulders burned from swimming. After 5 hours, she could barely feel her legs. She ignored it. She had a job to finish. The Japanese defenders never spotted her. She stayed submerged except when measuring depth. She moved during the hours between midnight and 4 a.m. when Japanese patrols were least active. She learned their patterns. Patrol boats passed every 90 minutes. She timed her measurements between patrols. Guard changes happened at 2 a.m. She used that 15-minute window when the beach was quietest to work closer to shore, measuring the critical shallows where landing craft would approach. She covered 47 kilometers of coastline in 12 nights. She measured 2,350 individual depth points. She worked alone, no backup, no support team. If she had gotten into trouble, cramp, injury, Japanese patrol, nobody would have known. Nobody would have come for her. She was operating without authorization. Officially, she didn't exist out there. By October 18th, she had complete depth data for MacArthur's 3 planned approach channels. The data confirmed her analysis. The 1920 charts were catastrophically wrong. The Eastern Approach Channel, the one MacArthur's staff preferred because it was widest, had a sandbar at 1.1 meters depth. At low tide, it was 0.9 meters below the surface. Landing craft drew 1.2 meters fully loaded. Simple math. They would run aground 300 meters from shore. Every single craft in the first wave would be stuck. Men would have to abandon the boats and wade through chest-deep water under Japanese machine gun fire. The casualty rate would be unsustainable. The Western Approach Channel, which MacArthur's staff had dismissed as too narrow, was actually the safest route. Dorothy's measurements showed consistent depth of 1.92.1 meters at low tide, deep enough for landing craft, wide enough for the invasion fleet. It was the correct approach. MacArthur's staff had chosen the wrong one because they were working with 24-year-old data. She drafted new charts showing the corrected depths. She included her raw data, all to 350 measurement points. She documented her methodology. She showed her calculations. She made it impossible to dismiss as speculation. This was empirical data, measured, verified, accurate. She submitted the charts to MacArthur's planning staff on October 19th at 8 a.m. The staff cartographer reviewed her work. He looked at the data. He looked at her. He asked how she had obtained the measurements. She told him the truth. Solo night surveys, 14 operations, systematic grid coverage, 2 kilometers offshore to 100 meters from beach. She had swum 47 kilometers of enemy coastline without authorization. The cartographer asked if the surveys were authorized. She said no. He asked if she had approval from Hydrographic Command. She said no. He asked if anyone had verified her measurements. She said no. One person, one swimmer. No verification, no backup, no authorization. He forwarded the charts to MacArthur's chief of staff with a note. Unauthorized survey data from female ensign. Single source measurement. Recommend disregard pending official verification. October 20th, 6:42 a.m. MacArthur dismissed her charts as incorrect. His invasion fleet was already moving toward the Eastern Approach Channel, the channel Dorothy had identified as impassable. The fleet was 11 hours from the landing zone. In 11 hours, 200,000 men would attempt to land on a beach using charts that would kill thousands of them. Dorothy had 11 hours to prove MacArthur wrong. She made one final decision. She would prove the charts were correct by showing that the existing charts were wrong. She would demonstrate physically that the Eastern Approach was a trap. She took a motor launch to the Eastern Approach Channel. She brought a Navy cameraman with her, Corporal James Rivera. She had convinced Rivera to document routine survey verification work. Rivera thought he was filming training footage. He had no idea what Dorothy was actually doing. At 9:15 a.m., Dorothy dropped a weighted depth line in the middle of the channel MacArthur's invasion fleet planned to use. The weight hit bottom at 1.1 meters. She had Rivera film it. The film showed the depth marker clearly, 1.1 meters. She moved 50 meters north and measured again, 1.0 meters. Film it. She moved again, 1.2 meters. Film it. She measured 6 more positions along the channel. Every measurement confirmed her charts. The Eastern Approach was exactly as shallow as she had documented. At low tide, it would be impassable. She returned to the command ship at 11:30 a.m. with the film footage. She requested immediate meeting with MacArthur's operations officer. The duty officer tried to dismiss her. She told him she had film evidence that the invasion fleet was heading toward disaster. The duty officer brought her to Commander Paul Stevens, MacArthur's deputy operations chief. Stevens reviewed the footage. He saw the depth measurements. He saw the film timestamp showing the measurements were taken that morning at low tide. He saw that every measurement matched Dorothy's unauthorized charts. He looked at Dorothy and asked a question that would decide the fate of 200,000 men. "Ensign, why should I believe you?" Dorothy said, "Sir, you don't have to believe me. You have to believe the mathematics. Landing craft draw 1.2 meters. This channel is 1.1 meters deep at low tide. That's not opinion, that's physics. If the fleet uses this approach, every craft in the first wave runs aground. You'll have 3,000 men in the water under Japanese fire. The casualty rate will be 40–60%. That's 1-200–1-800 dead in the first 10 minutes. You don't have to trust me. You just have to do the math." Stevens brought the data to MacArthur at 1:47 p.m. The invasion fleet was 4 hours from the landing zone. MacArthur reviewed Dorothy's charts. He reviewed the film footage. He reviewed the mathematics. He asked his chief of staff why existing reconnaissance hadn't caught the depth problem. The chief of staff had no answer. The frogmen surveys had been incomplete. The aerial reconnaissance couldn't measure depth. The existing charts were 24 years old. Nobody had verified them because verification meant sending swimmers into Japanese-controlled waters, and swimmers died. MacArthur asked Stevens who had conducted the new surveys. Stevens said, "A female ensign, sir, Lieutenant Dorothy Marsh. She conducted 14 unauthorized night surveys over the past 2 weeks. Solo swimmer. No support team. She measured 47 kilometers of coastline without authorization." MacArthur asked, "Is the data accurate?" Stevens said, "We verified her measurements this morning. They're accurate to within 0.1 meters, sir. Her charts are correct. Our charts are wrong." MacArthur made the decision at 2:03 p.m. Redirect the invasion fleet to the western approach channel. Use Dorothy Marsh's charts. The eastern approach was a trap. The western approach was clear. The order went out at 2:17 p.m. The fleet adjusted course. Navigation officers scrambled to redistribute Dorothy's charts to 340 landing craft. The invasion fleet shifted from eastern approach to western approach. The change added 40 minutes to the landing timeline, but it meant the landing craft would reach the beach instead of running aground 300 meters offshore. At 6 a.m. on October 21st, MacArthur's invasion force landed on Leyte Gulf through the western approach channel. All 200,000 men reached the beach without a single landing craft running aground. The approach was flawless. Navigation was precise. Every craft made it to shore. Every man stepped onto the beach instead of wading through chest-deep water under fire. Casualties in the initial landing were 49 killed. The projected casualty estimate for the eastern approach had been 2,400 in the first wave alone. Dorothy's unauthorized surveys had saved between 1,750 and 2,350 lives. The difference between disaster and success was one woman who ignored orders and did the job correctly. On October 22nd, a reconnaissance team surveyed the eastern approach channel, the one MacArthur had originally planned to use. They confirmed Dorothy's measurements. The sandbar was exactly where she had mapped it. At low tide, depth was 0.9 meters. Landing craft would have grounded 300 meters from shore. The first wave would have been slaughtered. The team calculated that if MacArthur had used the eastern approach, casualties in the first 30 minutes would have been 2,400 to 3,200 men. Dorothy had been right. MacArthur's original plan had been a death trap. MacArthur's headquarters issued a commendation for exceptional navigation planning in the Leyte Gulf invasion. The commendation was awarded to the Naval Hydrographic Office in Washington. Dorothy Marsh's name was not mentioned. The official after-action report credits improved reconnaissance methods for the accurate depth charts. The report does not specify who conducted the reconnaissance or what methods were used. The film footage Dorothy had shot proving the eastern approach was impassable was classified. It remained classified until 1982. When it was finally declassified, it was filed in the National Archives under Philippine Campaign Navigation Materials, 1944. No explanation, no context, just footage of depth measurements that saved thousands of lives. Dorothy received orders on October 25th to report to the Hydrographic Office in Pearl Harbor. She expected a court-martial for unauthorized operations. Instead, the office chief told her the Navy was establishing a new hydrographic survey unit for Pacific operations. He asked if she would lead it. She asked if the unit would be authorized to conduct field surveys. He said yes. She asked if female personnel would be allowed. He said the unit would accept qualified personnel regardless of gender. She accepted. Dorothy Marsh led the Navy Hydrographic Survey Unit from October 1944 through August 1945. Her teams mapped 340 kilometers of enemy coastline across the Pacific. The surveys supported 14 major amphibious operations, including Iwo Jima and Okinawa. 0 landing craft ran aground on approach channels her teams had surveyed. She trained 23 Navy surveyors, 19 men and 4 women. Every surveyor she trained survived the war. Her training methodology emphasized solo operations, night surveys, and systematic grid coverage. The same methodology Navy Command had initially rejected as too dangerous. Dorothy's unit discovered 17 previously uncharted sandbars and shallow zones in planned invasion routes. Every discovery prevented potential groundings. Every grounding prevented meant lives saved. The unit's work was classified during the war. After the war, it was filed away, forgotten. The techniques Dorothy developed became standard practice, but her name disappeared from the documentation. Dorothy returned to the United States in September 1945. She was offered a permanent position with the Naval Hydrographic Office. She declined. She returned to teaching at Smith College. She taught geography there until 1972. She never spoke publicly about the surveys. When colleagues asked about her war service, she said, "I worked in cartography, navigation charts. Nothing exciting." In 1985, a historian researching the Leyte Gulf invasion found references to unauthorized hydrographic surveys in declassified documents. The historian tracked down Dorothy and asked for an interview. Dorothy was 68 years old. She agreed to talk. The historian asked why she had conducted unauthorized surveys when she knew it could end her career. Dorothy said, "The math was wrong. The charts were wrong. Men were going to die because the charts were wrong. I could fix it, or I could follow regulations. I chose to fix it." The historian asked if she was scared swimming enemy beaches alone at night. Dorothy said, "Of course I was scared, but being scared doesn't change the math." The depth was still 1.1 meters. The landing craft still drew 1.2 meters. Fear doesn't fix that. Accurate measurements fix that. The historian asked how she felt about MacArthur dismissing her work. Dorothy said, "He didn't know me. He didn't know my work. He made a reasonable assumption based on available information. His mistake wasn't dismissing me. His mistake was trusting 24-year-old charts. When I showed him current data, he changed his mind. That's good leadership, admitting you're wrong when better data becomes available." The historian asked if she felt her contribution had been recognized. Dorothy said, "I did the job. The invasion succeeded. Men lived who would have died. That's the only recognition that matters. I don't need my name on a report. I need the work to be done correctly." She died in 1989 at age 72. The obituary in the Smith College Alumni magazine mentioned that she had served in the Navy during World War II. It did not mention the surveys. It did not mention Leyte Gulf. It did not mention that she had saved thousands of lives. The depth measurement methodology Dorothy developed, solo swimmer, systematic grid pattern, night operations, is now standard protocol for hostile coastline survey in the U.S. Navy. It's taught at the Naval Diving and Salvage Training Center in Panama City, Florida. The training manual calls it Marsh Protocol. The manual includes technical specifications, grid spacing, depth measurement intervals, safety procedures, everything Dorothy invented while swimming enemy beaches alone in 1944. The manual does not mention that the protocol was developed by a woman MacArthur dismissed as unqualified. It does not mention that she invented it because Navy Command refused to let her do the job any other way. It does not mention that she conducted 14 unauthorized operations to prove the method worked. The manual just says Marsh Protocol and explains how to do it. Modern Navy SEALs use Marsh Protocol for pre-invasion hydrographic reconnaissance. They don't know who Marsh was. They just know the protocol works. It's saved lives in every major amphibious operation since 1944. Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan, every beach survey, every depth measurement, every successful landing, Marsh Protocol, MacArthur's Leyte. Gulf invasion is remembered as a tactical masterpiece. History books credit MacArthur's planning, his leadership, his triumphant return to the Philippines, the general waiting ashore, the famous photograph. I shall return. He returned because Dorothy Marsh's charts got him there. The charts aren't in the photograph. Dorothy isn't in the photograph. Just the general, just the triumph. Dorothy Marsh's charts are filed in the National Archives in a box labeled Philippine Campaign Navigation Data, 1944. Her name appears on the charts she drafted. It appears nowhere else in the official record of the invasion. The after-action reports credit improved reconnaissance. The commendations credit the hydrographic office. The history books credit MacArthur. That's not history forgetting her. That's history choosing to remember only the general. The woman who saved the invasion by swimming enemy beaches at night is a footnote in a declassified file that nobody reads. The general who dismissed her work gets the photograph, gets the credit, gets remembered. She was right. He was wrong. She saved thousands of lives. He got the glory. That's not injustice. That's just history choosing its heroes. And history has never chosen women who did the math correctly over generals who looked good in photographs.